Hey guys, hoping all is well with everybody. In this video, we're going to be continuing on with the read-along of The Secret Zoo by Brian Chick. And the last time we finished chapter 27. So today we're going to be starting with chapter 28. As always, please feel free to follow along, and I'll be showing you any pictures as we come across them. Chapter 28, Outside into the Inside. Ritchie! Ella barely had time to scream before the floor stopped falling. She was somewhere in the middle of "Eee!" when they hit something with a solid thump. The impact sent the two scouts tumbling, and Ella wound up with her face pressed into the ground. She raised her hand and spat out a mouthful of sand. "Ritchie!" she called out. "You okay?" Ritchie lay beside her in a contorted position. He looked as if he were trying to massage his back with his own 2 feet. "Sort of," he said. They found themselves in a dirt tunnel that was just wide enough to hold their bodies. Illuminated by overhead lights set in the walls, the tunnel continued straight for about 30 yards and branched at least a dozen times. Some of the branches were on the left, others on the right. The adjoining crawlways were generally circular, and their diameters varied. 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet. They were capable of holding animals of different sizes. The scouts seemed to be in a central tunnel, a place where other similar passages connected. It ended at what appeared to be a curtain, a velvet curtain with thick folds. Ella?" Ritchie said. "Yeah?" "Why is a curtain hanging there?" "In the ground." "Beats me," Ella answered. The ground was crowded with prairie dogs. The skittish animals were running back and forth, diving in and out of the passageways, and acting half crazed as they jumped and bumped into one another. They yipped, squealed, and made an enormous fuss. A noise erupted behind them, and the scouts peered over their shoulders. The platform that had lowered them into the ground was rising on top of a pole. The pole rotated and threaded the platform back into place, filling the tunnels with dust and cutting them off from the world above. Ritchie coughed and muttered, "It's a machine. But how?" "I don't know," Ella said, "but there's only one way to go now." The two scouts commenced crawling down the main tunnel, their backs occasionally scraping the low ceiling. Prairie dogs ran beneath them and circled their arms. Ella watched one crash into the rump of a wider prairie dog and then tumble down. It stood up, angrily shook off the dirt, and scampered away. "Where are they going?" Ritchie asked. "I don't know. Back and forth." "Back and forth to where?" "I don't know that either, but if we keep crawling, I bet we'll find out." As they crawled past the mouth of a connecting tunnel, they saw it was covered with a velvet curtain, similar to the one ahead of them. Second and third tunnels weren't. Ella didn't understand, and judging by Ritchie's breathy, "Huh?" he didn't either. They twisted and wriggled around through the prairie dogs. One ran beneath Ella, brushing its short pointy tail across her face. Ella hollered, and the prairie dog yipped, as if to say, "Sorry," or maybe, "Deal with it." Then it scurried down the tunnel, wagging its furry fanny. "These gophers have some nerve," Ella exclaimed. A prairie dog sprang from a hole and ran across her hands, yipping all the way. "What am I, invisible?" she said. As they neared the curtain, they saw it was red with tassels. It completely covered the passage. "Follow me," Ella said. They pushed through, one at a time. On the other side of the curtain, the tunnel widened to twice its size. A few yards ahead, the cave came to an end, and sunlight poured in. "The sun?" Ella furrowed her brow. "We're in a cave. How can it—" Her voice trailed off. "How can it be sunny?" Ritchie finished her question. "It's the middle of the night." They stood up and dusted off their pants. "Are we inside?" "I think so," Ritchie said. They stood in awe. Prairie dogs still raced around them. Ritchie straightened his giant eyeglasses and headed for the exit. "Come on," he said in a deep voice. "Let's find our friends." Ella hurried to catch him. Together they stepped outside, into the inside. Chapter 29, Inside Arctic Town. Water rushed against Noah's face and pulled back his hair. His feet repeatedly slapped the walls and ceiling of the tunnel. Each time Podgy rounded a bend, Noah worried that he'd slip off the penguin's back and drown. He couldn't figure out where he was. Inside the block of ice? In the ground? Who had built this secret tunnel? And why? Something brushed against his face. It was soft and smooth like velvet. Just as Noah realized that he was about to run out of breath again, a spot of light appeared in the distance. Podgy worked his flippers harder than ever to gain speed. As they swam forward, the light grew continuously until Noah realized it was an opening in the ceiling of the cave. A beam of light streamed through the hole. Podgy porpoised through the opening in the glistening arc of rainbow colors as water sprinkled around him in the sunlight. He landed belly first on a sheet of ice and skidded forward at full speed. Screaming, Noah rode atop Podgy as if he were on a toboggan and that had veered out of control. 50 feet ahead, they slid to a stop. Noah lay still for several seconds, too stunned to speak. He wiped the icy water off his brow and looked around. Wherever he was, the place looked like the North Pole. They stopped in the middle of a frozen lake surrounded by snow-peaked mountains. Penguins were scattered everywhere. Noah saw them on the mountainsides, black freckles dotting the white hillside. The sky was blue and cloudless. "Where am I?" Noah gasped. Podgy couldn't answer, of course, but that was okay, because Noah figured it out for himself. He was in Arctic Town. The real Arctic Town. Podgy flapped his flippers briefly and waddled off in a rush. He looked like a normal penguin, not one that could shuttle a boy to a snowy fairyland. Rubbing his arms, Noah scurried up beside him. "You are on my side!" Noah surveyed the incredible snowy landscape and added, "Podgy, I'm freezing." Another penguin, almost as large as Podgy, dashed between the two of them and dived into the ice hole that they just sailed out of. "Where's he going?" Noah asked. "Not the zoo. Why would he—" "Wait a minute. That's your replacement. He's taking your place at the zoo, so no one will notice that a penguin is missing." Podgy kept waddling forward. "This explains that part in Megan's journal about seeing 3 bears instead of 2. The third bear was Blizzard's replacement. They didn't change places fast enough, so they both were in the zoo at the same time." Podgy waved his flippers as if to indicate that Noah was onto something. "Holy smokes! What is this place?" Suddenly, little tremors shook the ice. In the distance, something was charging toward them. Noah couldn't make out what it was. Podgy?" he mumbled. "Is that something we should be worried about?" As the figure drew near, the ice downright quaked. When it finally shot into view, Noah discovered what it was. A polar bear. "Blizzard!" Noah hollered with delight. He turned to Podgy and exclaimed, "Blizzard and I! We've met!" Blizzard threw his snout toward the sky and roared. He slowed down, but his footfalls continued to shake the ice and rock Podgy about. The king-sized polar bear stopped in front of Noah and let out a friendly grunt. Noah reached out and stroked his fur as if he were a harmless pet. Blizzard nudged his snout against the boy's arm. "I made it, Blizzard!" Blizzard slowly lowered his stomach to the ground. His intention was clear. He wanted Noah to climb on his back. When Noah didn't move, the bear swung his big snout around and nudged the boy's rear end, bringing him closer. "First Podgy, and now you," Noah said. He grabbed 2 handfuls of fur, climbed up Blizzard's side, and mounted him like a horse. "Giddy up!" Blizzard swiftly rose to his feet and pitched his weight forward. Noah felt the bear's massive muscles working beneath him. "Hi-ho! Blizzard away!" Though Noah had said this as a joke, the bear broke into a serious run. With each lunge forward, Noah bounced up and down and sideways. Podgy scurried after them, trying to run, but succeedingly only in waddling quickly. With his flippers stretched out to his sides, he looked like a miniature airplane tooling down the runway. Noah cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Come on, Podgy!" The penguin raced after them, but he couldn't keep up. "Blizzard," Noah said, "I need to get out of this cold." Blizzard growled and picked up speed. Noah glanced over his shoulder. Poor Podgy had shrunk into a black dot on the ice. Noah felt sorry for him. Sorry that he'd been born a fat bird and couldn't fly. Blizzard raced forward. A snowy shoreline appeared ahead, populated by a crowd of at least 50 penguins. When Blizzard approached, the birds were standing idle. Seconds later, Noah witnessed something remarkable. The penguins divided themselves into two equal groups, creating a narrow aisle between them. Then one small penguin waddled to the end of the aisle. He looked toward the sky, and the other penguins looked toward him. Suddenly, he charged down the path when he neared the edge of the crowd, and the other penguins chased after him. Toward the penguins raced across the ice. What's that? Noah muttered. A game? The small penguin jumped and flapped his flippers. Noah's eyes widened. His jaw dropped. The penguin started to fly. Not very high, perhaps 5 feet above the ice, but he was unmistakably airborne. No way! Noah called from his bare-top view. The bird struggled to stay in the air. As he beat his flippers, his body jerked, rose, dipped, jerked, rose, and dipped. He was sloppy and uncoordinated, but he managed to stay up. The other penguins leaped into the air, only to crash down to the ice, somersault, and tumble over one another. It's a flight school, Noah said. The penguins are learning to fly. Within seconds, all the penguins had crashed and turned into a mound of rolling blubber and flailing flippers. Only the small penguin managed to stay in the air for a while. He sailed as high as 10 feet before he, too, crashed to the ice. No way! Blizzard slowed down at the shore of the frozen lake and stomped onto the frosty white land. He and Noah were surrounded on all sides by snow-covered hills and distant ice-capped mountains. Where are we going, Blizz? I need to... Noah's eyes focused on the details of a bright white landscape, and he found his answer. To the right, a huge igloo that had blended in with the snow became visible. At one end had an arched opening, which Noah figured must be the doorway. Blizzard padded to the igloo, and Noah hunched down as they could fit through the archway. The igloo was warm. A colorful oriental rug lay on the floor. A bundle of warm, dry clothing and a pile of blankets were heaped in the middle. Noah kicked up his legs and slid down Blizzard's side. Shivering, he walked to the bundle and found a note pinned to the blanket on top. Noah, if you're reading this, then you got here early because I was hoping to meet you. This is the igloo of old, and if you're reading this, you're soaking wet. I asked the animals to round up a change of clothes for you. I'll see you in the city of species. Podgy will show you the way. Remember to be careful. Don't let anyone stop you. You've come too far to turn back now. Good luck, little man. Tank. The city of species, Noah said. What's that? He disregarded the note for the time being and reached for what was urgent, the bundle of warm, dry clothes. He picked up the fresh towel, big enough to cover a lion, and stripped off his wet jacket and shirt, shivering madly. When he undid the button of his pants, he looked at Blizzard and said, Do you mind? I know you're a bear and everything, but still... Blizzard rolled his head to one side and gazed out the arched doorway. Thanks, Noah said. He worked the towel over his body, rubbing vehemently. Once he was dry, he pulled 2 heavy blankets from a pile, dropped down on the rug, and dived between the folds of the covers. I'm so cold, he moaned. Under the weight of the blankets, Noah was soon warmed by the heat of his own body. Blizzard came near. At eye level, Noah had a clear view of his paws. They were big enough to stomp out a campfire, and his claws were sharp enough to slice a watermelon. The bear dropped his body and nudged in beside Noah. Not a moment later, Podgy waddled through the entrance to the igloo. Hey, Podgy, Noah mumbled. Nice that you could make it. Podgy aimed straight for the bundle. He snatched a blanket with his bill, turned around, walked on top of Noah, and dropped the cover evenly across his shoulders. Thanks, Podge. Noah nestled so close to Blizzard that his knees slipped into the bear's flurry blubber. The great animal gently laid his head across Noah's body and wrapped him in his long neck. Noah could hear Blizzard breathing. He could even feel the bursts of air across his back. The chill continued to ease out of his body. Noah realized how exhausted he was. It was the middle of the night at home, wherever that was. A quick nap would help him in his next adventure. He closed his eyes and dozed off, letting himself slip into dreamland. In his mind, he found a memory of his sister and held it. He pictured Megan's face and her smile. Love for her filled his heart as he fell asleep in the warmth of his strange and wonderful new friends. Chapter 30. Ritchie draws a crowd. Ella and Richie stepped out of the cave and into a blast of hot air and blinding light. The landscape was dry and dusty. Cacti grew across the dry terrain, some with round stems that resembled prickly mittens and others with long stems like the pipes of a green organ. The ground was pitted with countless holes. Prairie dogs raced from one hole to another, kicking up clouds of dust as they dived recklessly in and out. The furry critters dashed around in erratic zigzags. They sprinted and stopped, looking confused or surprised by every spot that their own paws carried them to. Far across the plain, a strange light blinked on and off. Each surge displayed a new color: red, green, yellow, blue, and orange. "What's that light?" Ella asked. "I have no idea." Richie looked around and said, "Where are we?" Ella scooped up a handful of dirt and let it sift through her fingers. "I don't know," she said, "but this place is dry and hot and filled with gophers." "Stop calling them gophers. They're prairie dogs." "Whatever," she said. "Look, Richie, I only know what you know. We crawled through some kind of secret tunnel and wound up here. This doesn't make sense to me either. Will any of this ever make sense?" Ella thought about it. "I hope so. Maybe we'll just take a while. Come on, let's see what there is to see." She started out across the flat terrain. "Like the bear," Richie said, hurrying after her. "The who?" "The bear that went over the mountain. You know that song? He threw back his head and sang, 'The bear went over the mountain, and the bear went over the mountain. The bear, Richie, went over the mountain to see.'" "Richie, okay. Hold on a second." Richie reached into his backpack and pulled out his flashy metallic running shoes. They glittered in the sunlight. "Let me put on my walking feet first." "Great," Ella moaned. "You're gonna blind the gophers." Richie tied his shoelaces and the scouts headed off. After a while, they stripped off their jackets and crammed them into Richie's backpack. In no time, sweat dripped from their brows and their hair clung to their foreheads. Occasionally, a prairie dog sat on its rear end and peered up at them. The hard, fixed stares of the rodents suggested that they expected something from the children. At one point, a gang of prairie dogs started to trail Ritchie. Their eyes were riveted on his running shoes. They chased his feet in little zigzags, stopping and starting abruptly and crashing into one another. Look, Richie, you have a fan club," Ella exclaimed. "Yeah, what's up with that?" "I guess you're not the only one who likes those shoes." Richie glanced at his heels. "You think they like my shoes?" "Well," Ella said with a smile, "they shine more than your personality does, that's for sure." Richie took a few steps toward and watched the animals rush around his shoes again. As the scouts made their way across the dry landscape, more and more prairie dogs tagged along behind him. Glancing over his shoulder and under his arm, Richie kept an inventory of the animals. They seemed mesmerized by and afraid of his shoes at the same time. The group advanced steadily. In the dry terrain, they passed cacti shaped like pitchforks, walked through thin patches of knee-high grass, and maneuvered around countless holes made by prairie dogs. As Richie walked, his slick shoes sparkled in the sunlight. More than 100 prairie dogs were now chasing him, running in spurts that loosely matched the movement of his feet. Every so often, a prairie dog darted between Ella's legs or across her toes, prompting her to holler, "Hey!" or "Bad gopher!" The scouts continued their journey across the barren plain. passing strange, oddly shaped cacti and kicking up clouds of dust. Eventually they reached the light. For a light with such a bright and powerful beam, it was unexpectedly small, about the size of an orange. Ella looked at Ritchie. Every time the light blinked, she was saturated in a new color. When the blue color flashed, she said, "You look like a smurf." Ritchie shot her scornful look and stuck out his tongue, which turned green in the simultaneous flash of the green light. Below the light was a curtain, purple and velvet, with yellow tassels hanging beneath it. It looked like a curtain they'd seen at the Chamber of Lights. "Look familiar?" Ella asked. "Yep." The curtain was fastened to a rod, but the rod, like a light, was fastened to anything. Wasn't fastened to anything. It just hovered in the air. Who does the decorating around this place?" Ella said. "Houdini?" Beside the curtain was an old wooden sign that stood on a single post. It read, end of Sector 62. "Sector 62? Ritchie asked. "No clue," Ella said. "Should we go through the curtain?" Ritchie asked, "or around it?" "You decide." Ritchie shrugged his shoulders and decided to walk beside it. Suddenly, his hands snapped as if he'd walked into a wall. He staggered and dropped on his rear end. "Whoa!" Ella said. "You okay? What happened?" She reached out and touched the space beside the curtain. The space touched her back. It was a wall painted to look exactly like the desert they were in. It felt soft and gooey, like jello. Ella pushed her palm forward, and the wall gooped over her fingertips. Then it firmed up and spit out her hand. "What in the world?" The paint was gone from the spot that she touched, and a black handprint had replaced it. Then, like magic, fresh paint appeared and the handprint melted away. The image on the strange wall had restored itself. Ella looked down at her hand. Sure enough, some sort of paint was smeared all over it. "Ew!" She wiped the gunk off her pants. "Gross!" Ritchie was covered with paint splotches. His face was as blue as the sky, and his legs looked as yellowy brown as the desert plain. He stood up and wiped the gunk off his nose, saying, "So much for going around it. I guess that means we go through it," Ella said. Ritchie wiped his hands on the back of his pants. "Ladies first," he said. She shook the tension out of her shoulders, gingerly stepped forward, and grumbled, "Always the gentleman," as she pulled back the curtain. And that is where I will end the video there. But I hope you guys enjoyed that video, and I hope to see you guys soon in the continuation of the read-along of The Secret Zoo by Brian Chick, and where we start off next will be with Chapter 31. But as always, guys, please take good care of yourselves, and thank you so much for watching.